Hello, and thank you for joining us on this week's version of Get Booked with Mary and Jennifer. I'm Mary.
I'm Jennifer.
Hey Jen, what are we going to talk about today?
It's Night Week at the library. If you missed it, I had challenged The Rock in our virtual story time.
How'd that go?
Yay. I, of course, won, because, you know, as you do against The Rock.
Yeah. I don't really smell what you're cooking.
Yeah, you know.
Okay, so do you want to go first?
Sure. Alright, my first book is Alanna, the First Adventure by Tamora Pierce. It is the first book in the Song of a Lioness Quartet. Alanna and her twin brother, Tom, are sent away to kind of school. She's supposed to go to magic school, he's supposed to go to night school. She talks him into switching places because she's always wanted to be a knight who hasn't, and he could care less about being a knight, so I guess him. And, she meets a prince, she gets her butt kicked a lot. There's a little bit of magic, it's really fun. It's an older YA title, but it's one that a lot of people is near and dear to their hearts. Mine included. Though it took me a long time to read it.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of good things about this from a lot of my friends.
It's really good.
Cool. So my first book is going to be similar, I think, to your second book, but a little bit different. So this is a first book in a duology by Renee Ahdieh called Flame in the Mist. It's essentially the only, like, the easiest parallel to describe it is, like, it's Mulan, essentially, but not Mulan. It's a little bit different. So it's like feudal Japan. There's a girl who's really cool, but she's getting sent to the city to get married off. But she's not really crazy about that, and then on the way there, she's by herself, and it's just, like, the carriage and, like, the guards that are with her, that gets attacked, and everyone thinks she's dead, but it turns out she's not. She's able to get out from the wreckage. Because it's feudal Japan, much like Mulan, she doesn't really feel safe, walking around just in her regular clothes, so she manages to steal some clothes and disguise herself as a boy, and she ends up with this group of Ronin. So, I know we're talking about knights, but samurais are, like, the Japanese version of knights. And so this group of Ronin, as she goes through, it turns out maybe there's a little bit something supernatural about them. And of course she hates this one boy, so maybe they kiss later. But, you know, a lot of it, there's a huge political thing that's happening. This group of, like, Ronin, orphan Ronins, essentially, because they're all teens, their families have been disgraced by something. There's a huge political thing going on in the main capital city, and so they're kind of looking to start a revolution. And she gets swept up in it, and it's a really great book. And it's also a duology, and they're not too terribly long, so if you're looking for, like, a good, like, I just need something to sink my teeth in that's not, like, too dark and not too heavy, this is really, really good. What do you have?
Speaking of Mulan, I've got Sherry Thomas's adaptation of Mulan called The Magnolia Sword. This just came out last year. It's really good. It's a little bit, obviously, different than the Disney movie, but Mulan does become a soldier. She is actually, so she's in the camp, and she's trying to figure out how she's going to get out of the camp, camp full of soldiers, and, of course, boys, males. She's like, oh god, how's this going to work? So she ends up challenging the prince, or the prince's bodyguard, and she has been, there's a lot of backstory to this part, but she's been training, essentially, sword fighting her whole life, training for this duel that she's supposed to go on. That's not the word, but whatever. Anyways, so she ends up in the prince's bodyguard companions, and so she starts traveling with them, so it's a band of fewer men, and so she's able to disguise herself a bit more. And of course, there's all this political drama and trouble and the duel that she's supposed to be challenged on. So it's really good.
Cool. So my next one is a little far out. I went liberal with the night theme, just like I did with the mermaid theme. So this is the first volume of Sailor Moon, and as you read through the Sailor Moon series, you find out they are the reincarnations of their former selves. It's very strange. It's manga. It's fantasy. You just go with it. But Sailor Moon is like the queen of the moon, queen princess of the moon, sort of, depending on how you read it. And all the other sailor scouts that are around her are essentially her knights of the round table, if you would say. I'm taking some liberties here. Or they're called Senshei, the inner Senshei. And so it's like, what, Mars, Venus, Mercury, Jupiter? Maybe. It's been a while. Anyway, so they make up like the innerness of it, and like Venus is kind of like the head of the knights, and she's my favorite. She always mispronounces words, but then like comes in with a big sword and just takes care of business. So it's really good. It's also kind of got like school drama to it as well, because it's like, oh no, we found out we're superheroes, but we still have to like study for that math test. Why? And Usagi, who is Sailor Moon, is really relatable. She likes to eat, she likes to sleep, she likes to cry. She has like, and she, you know, she wants to be a pop star when she grows up, and actually not Sailor Venus. But of course there's a boy, Tuxedo Mask, that comes in and out of her life. That maybe he's part of her reincarnated past as well. Yeah, so there's a lot of mystery to it, and it's super fun. And also, there's only 12 volumes of it, so it's not like One Piece where there's over 100 graphic novels or manga novels that you have to read. There's 12. There you go.
Alright, my next one is Cold Burn of Magic by Jennifer Estep. She also writes, this one is a YA, but she also writes some really great adult fantasy books. And in this one, I forget her main name, but she's a warrior. She's in a pawn shop one day hanging out with her friend, and they live in this world where there's lots of monsters and there's lots of superstition, and you have to do certain things in order to pass through places. But she's in a pawn shop. One of the boys from one of the head families, which is kind of like a mob part. It's not really a mob part, but it's sort of like the mob families. So one of the boys comes in, there's an attack. She has a split second to decide, am I going to let him die? Am I going to fight to save him? She ends up fighting to save him, and then she becomes entangled into this web of families, which she swore she would never do.
Dun, dun, dun.
I know. And of course there's romance. And it's a trilogy, all the books are out. It's really fun.
I was going to talk about some Arthurian Legend like books and comics that we have, but I book talked them earlier when we opened, so they're not here. Oh, that's cool, because like we have 2 books called Once and Future, but they're not the same. They're both King Arthur retellings, so I think one of them I probably talked about and get booked before. That one's a YA book, and then Kieran Killian, who does like much more like older teen adult comics, also has a Once and Future Arthur retelling, which I haven't read that either because I book talked it and it went away before it, and I was like, wait, I should have read it first.
That's the trick about librarians. You take the books first, and that way you get a chance to read them.
And you know, like I forgot to check out Superman vs. the Klan the other day, and I was like, dang it, I have to just put a hold on it. The world will not end. So I went with the Star Wars Jedi Knight theme. So this actually, I think, was the first book that came out with all of the new Star Wars books a couple years ago when they rebooted the franchise and Disney Hyperion started printing stuff. So this one is Ahsoka by E.K. Johnston. I love this book. It's really great. So if you've watched the Clone Wars, you know, and if you haven't, spoiler, you should have watched it by now. Ahsoka like fakes her death. And so this is what happens after the Clone Wars is finished and what she does. And she's trying not to be a Jedi Knight, but she can't, like, she kind of gets pulled back into helping people whether she wants to or not. Like, she just wants to, like, be left alone, and she can't do it because she took that oath. What you got next?
Alright, so I actually do have 2 Arthurian Legends, and I'll just talk about them together. So this one is The Song of the Sparrow by Lisa Ann Sandell. It is a novel in verse, which is fun. It is the tale from Guinevere's perspective. Nope, I'm sorry, Elaine's perspective. And Elaine, of course, doesn't like Guinevere. But in the original tale. But they have like some kind of interesting conversations in this book. Lisa Ann Sandell is actually one of the first authors that I ever met and talked to, and so she'll always have a special place in my heart.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, she's really sweet. And then, of course, Meg Cabot, because I'm a Meg Cabot girl. So she has a book, Avalon High. It is a modern-day Arthur retelling in high school. It also... Whoops. It also became a Disney movie, a Disney Channel movie, so you might have seen that.
Oh, that's why it's familiar. Thanks.
Yes.
Okay.
I feel like Arthur kind of drops in, but that's maybe not true. No, that's not true at all. They may or may not be reincarnations of King Arthur's court.
Okay. I still went with the Star Wars theme, so let's talk about a fallen knight. Let's talk about Darth Vader. So this series came out probably about 3 or 4 years ago. What is time? It's by Soule. It's really, really good. It actually takes place in between episode 3 and episode 4. So it is, actually no, wait, it takes place, sorry, I read all the Star Wars comics at once together when Marvel started redoing them, and now it's just like all together in my head. Oh no, this one is the one where it's episode 3. Sorry, the new Marvel Star Wars relaunch picks it between episode 4 and 5. So this one, my bad, is right after 3. So part of the reason I love this comic is because it made me not hate episodes 1, 2, and 3 anymore. It really gets into the inner workings of what Vader is thinking. And Vader also starting to realize that, you know, he's done all of this stuff to get to be the Hand of the Emperor, but maybe being the Hand of the Emperor is disposable, and he needs to up his game, but also maybe play his own game at the same time. So it's kind of cool because it makes him like a much more multifaceted character, because he's really easy to hate in episodes 1, 2, and 3, partly because of the script, partly because of the actor. But this kind of gives Darth Vader some of his humanity back. The irony, because now he's mostly a robot. And then I'll go again. So I've talked about the Star Wars Marvel reboot that happened a couple years ago when they got the licensing back, and those comics are pretty good. They're by Jason. Most of them are by Jason Aaron, who also writes Thor and Avengers, which are really, really good. I love his Thor run. But with all of that, they re-released the original Marvel comics from the late 70s and 80s. So I grew up reading these when I wasn't supposed to. My brother had them all single issue, and so I would get in trouble if I read them. Because he'd be like, get out of my room! But they're like great, fun, like space swashbuckling kind of comics. It's not the Star Wars that you think of now, because the franchise was still, you know, it was just this movie that got made and no one expected it to be popular. So these are like super fun. I love the artwork. It's very 70s, early 80s Marvel, and it also has Jasper the Giant Rabbit, who sounds like, yeah, I know. Like, people were so like bummed when he didn't show up in the new Star Wars. But he's like a super cool character that's like friends with Han Solo, I think. It's been a while since I've read these. But yeah, but they're super fun space books.
Show us the art.
Oh, my god. It's very much like 70s Marvel, so there's like a lot of like, colors and words. Like, so much words. Like, it's a very wordy comic. But most of them used to be this way. So, but yeah, there's also like good space fights. Like, of course, Luke has to fight Vader. That's what they do. It's probably a figment of his imagination. If I remember some of the themes. Alright, what's your last book?
Alright, my last book is Grave Mercy by Robin LeFevers.
You love this book.
I do love this book. So there is, starting with this book, there is a trilogy, and then recently there is a spin-off-ish duology, and the second book in that duology is about to drop, I think in the fall. And all I'm going to say about this is assassin nuns.
It really sells itself.
Yes,
it's very good.
So good.
So my last book, again, I was liberal. I should have been a jerk and just picked only YA books that had the term knight in the, like, N-I-G-H-T.
There is a lot.
I should have, just to be, like, been funny. But I didn't. I just thought of 3 books I could have done. Dang it. So I'm going to talk about Batman: The Dark Knight Returns. This is considered a classic in Batman books. This is definitely like more of like a high school adult read. It is by Frank Miller, when Frank Miller was still relevant, and it's kind of like between this and his Daredevil run, like really put him on the and his Wolverine run, really kind of solidified him in comics. And this was a very different, darker Batman story than we'd ever seen at this point. Like, he was just this goofy guy that had all these gadgets and, like, this teen sidekick, you know, and it was silly. It was a very silly comic, but this made Batman much more gritty. So it takes place in the future. He and Superman have a huge fight. So if you've seen Batman vs. Superman, it's kind of loosely based on this comic. it's really good. I think it's one of the few Batman stories I can say that like really still holds up like 20, 30 years later. So I don't want to talk too much about it because like it kind of ruins it.
Cool. Alright, we will see you next week. Thanks for watching.